Is the ivory-billed woodpecker extinct? Today's video is going to cover a brief history of the ivory-billed woodpecker, a new paper that is offering several lines of evidence for its continued existence, and I'm going to share my own thoughts at the end. Check down in the 4 chapters if you want to skip around, but let's just hop into it. So, today's topic is the ivory-billed woodpecker, Campophyllus principalis. This is a large species of woodpecker found in the American Southeast, or potentially found in the American Southeast. Historically, it was found in this range down here, which is in eastern Texas, Florida, just the American Southeast, as well as parts of Cuba. However, the last undisputed sighting of this species was in the 1940s. And it has been a little bit controversial. In the past 20-ish years, there's been several publications saying that this species is still around. However, they are typically hotly contested. This ended up becoming a bigger problem, a bigger issue, a larger issue, when in 2021, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which manages conservation, federal conservation in the United States, opened up public comments to officially list this species as extinct, meaning that any area that could possibly habitat it, if they are using the ivory-billed woodpecker as a reason to protect that habitat, they would no longer get that protection, right? That's the biggest worry about not listing this species as extinct if it really is there. But they are a really, really gorgeous species of bird. They do have a rich history. There's plenty of drawings. We do have specimens from them in museums. And I really want to just take a moment to say that, yes, their range might have been through all of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Great Plains, Appalachians. And there's this weird line I saw where it was a post-Civil War biologist assumed that the species was fleeing from the advance of civilization and it was destined to disappear. The article also notes that just as many of their contemporaries believe that Native Americans in the forest themselves were simply doomed by progress. So it's a bit of an antiquated view. Many issues when you dive into, if you think about it a little bit. But the last big encounter was in the 1930s, but I do believe, yes, the last generally accepted sighting from the area took place in 1944, but there have been reports since afterwards in the area in 1948, and there has been reports ever since. So I'm not going to go through all the crazy history of it. What I really want to focus on is this paper right here. So this came out on Friday, I think was the 18th, maybe Thursday, but its multiple lines of evidence suggest that the persistence of the ivory-billed woodpecker, Campophyllus principalis, in Louisiana. And I already made a post about this on Instagram, and there was an error that we'll discuss, and made me just want to take a step back, think about it a little bit, hear what people are saying. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this whole paper down step by step. We're going to first briefly go through intro, and then we're going to break down each of their lines of evidence, starting with I believe it's the visual encounter surveys, then there will be looking at audio surveys, then we will look at camera trap footage, and then we will look at the drone video footage. I'm going to try my best to add chapter markers down below, so if you want to skip around, please feel free to do that. But let's just start with the abstract. Again, like we said, 2021, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service opened public comment for proposal to declare the species extinct, which is, again, has many downstream conservation issues, if that is true. If that is listed as extinct. Apologies. And this paper is looking at observations over a 10-year search period from 2012 to 2022, and they have about 70,000 hours of recordings, of audio recordings, about 470,000 camera hours from trail cameras, and about 1,000 hours of drone flights. And really what this article is saying is that we have a lot of evidence. We have a lot of evidence that points to it. There's very little singular pieces of evidence that say it's there. Like, you can't just take one of the pictures by itself and say, this is the ivory-billed, right? They're really not saying that, but they're saying that based on this multiple lines of evidence, it might be premature to declare the species extinct. And I will say at the top of this that the conversation around everyone who believes that it's still out there is that there's a very good chance it will go extinct, right? They're saying that if it is alive, it is still out there, it's still out somewhere in the woods. The numbers are so low that we may not be able to do anything. But we don't know because we don't know how many are out there, right? So, we'll start with the introduction here a little bit. I've already covered a bit earlier, but this paper gives a fantastic overview. Of course, this is also linked down below. It's open access, so you don't need anything to view it. But the ivory bill was severely impacted by collectors, hunters, and habitat destruction throughout the U.S. There have been populations in Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, North America, as well as some in Cuba. I do need to double check this, but I believe the IUCN, the international conservation body, is not wanting to list this species as extinct because it might still be in Cuba. So that's just adding another line of evidence for another organization isn't ready to call them extinct either, but yeah, in Cuba. In 2005, a highly publicized description of 7 independent sightings and a video of a possible woodpecker in Arkansas were published. I believe some of the authors on that paper are also on this paper. But that was strongly debated. And a follow-up 2-year search did not produce additional imagery or documentation widely considered conclusive, despite at least 15 reported sightings. Most recently, published evidence suggested that ivory-billed woodpeckers are present in the forests in Florida's Choctawhatchee River, and a morphometric analysis of a 2010 photo pointed towards an ivory bill in Louisiana. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Actually, Dylan, cut that out. If I forget to cut it out, hey, what's up? So in 2021, again, U.S. Fish and Wildlife opened a public comment for proposal to declare the species extinct, and they said, ultimately, they defined the objective evidence needed to verify the continued existence of the species as clear photographs, feathers of demonstrated recent origin, specimens, etc. So really, they're just saying that we need a really solid, nobody can debate it photograph, or we need a feather, which is a very common way of figuring out what species, what bird species are in an area. And this paper does mention quite a bit this notion of lack of repeatable observations and the assumption that if a rare resident species is found, it should be repeatedly relocated, and that if it is not relocated, then the original observation of record is inadequate to prove persistence. Basically saying if you see it once, you should be able to see it again multiple times. And this paper does do a really good job of addressing those assumptions in the discussion section, so we'll get to that when we discuss that screen. But let's hop into the materials and methods. So I will say that this paper has only identified the region to Louisiana. And the big reason is that because of the endangered status of the species and ongoing research concerns, we omit specific location details. That's a very, very standard practice in conservation. It's the notion of geotagging, which I don't do. And just for reference, most of this field work was concentrated in October, May. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going through the methods step by step and just be like, here's visual encounters, here's audio recordings, we're going to first look at visual encounters, and we'll also look at the results and a discussion of the visual encounters. Then we'll look at the audio recordings, and then we'll look at the results of the audio recordings, etc., etc. I think this is a much better way of reading these types of articles because it helps you narrow your focus to a specific thing. So let's start with visual encounter surveys. So let's start with visual encounters. Now, with visual encounters, there's 2 main styles that you can do. The first is what these authors did. There is no standard protocol was followed for any of these observational techniques. They were guided by local conditions and observer experience. Basically, this is a more loose form of visual encounter, but it's still a great method. Basically, it's really useful if you just want to detect a very specific species and you just want to find it. So you may hear that by some lake, for example, let's just draw that here, there is some observation of the woodpecker. You may hear a call, you may have something that leads you to believe it's around this area. So then you set up a little watch part over here, right? And you're just waiting to see if there's anything there. This isn't necessarily standardized because maybe the next week you realize that it's actually inside of this thicket of trees. We're going to call that trees. Just bear with me. So then the next week you say, it's maybe not at the lake, so we're going to go stake out at the trees, or we're going to hike through the forest, right? This is yes, of course, it's less rigorous, but their point is not to survey the abundance of the organisms or how many different species there are. It's just to find this one taxa. So this is a very appropriate method. The other methodology are your more visual encounter surveys that are not opportunistic, and these are your standard transect surveys. Walk along a line, count what you find, or maybe you're going along a trail system and you just follow the trail, and then maybe some days you go down the opposite way of the trail. The visual encounter surveys have a wide body of literature, and I don't want to discuss it too further. Now, of course, visual encounters are probably the weakest of the evidence. In fact, if we go into the results, visual encounters, they reported 16 visual observations deemed by the observer to be probable ivory-billed woodpeckers. These are multiple observers on the property. And 7 of those were of high enough quality that they considered the sighting to be definite. So really what they're saying is that we thought we have seen them on these surveys. And again, the people who are doing these surveys are not amateurs by any means. Many of them have decades of experience. They do know what they're talking about. And let's see some of the results. The best results are actually in the appendix, which I should be able to display just like this. So for each of the visual observations, they list who made it. So this one, for example, is Frank Wiley, actually deceased, RIP. And they list out the conditions of the observation. So Frank and I hiked into the area we called the hot zone. We did playbacks of Ivory-Billed Kent calls. Playbacks are where you just play the call of an organism, and oftentimes organisms will call back. It's a great way of identifying organisms. There is caveats with it, but beyond the point of this video. And they didn't record anything in the notes. They then proceeded walking in a more or less southerly direction with Frank in the lead by about 10 yards. I was walking slowly, looking up to my right. As we approached a body of water, Frank stopped suddenly and blurted out something. He said he got a very good look at a male ivory-billed woodpecker. And of course, these descriptions are very, very verbose. That is generally what you want to be. You want to add as much detail as possible so that someone could recreate it. And then a very standard technique is to also draw what you saw right after you saw it. Don't wait 4 or 5 hours. Try to draw it as soon as possible so that your memory is fresh. This is a very, very old school technique of biology, but it is still standard. I have conducted so many visual encounter surveys, as well as opportunistic surveys like this one here. Including some with birds where you just listen for calls. I'm terrible at it. I was not the lead on that. But yeah, so I will say that they also add notes. This is very standard, so this is also a good lesson if you want to learn how to take field notes. This is a great example of field notes. So they have a sketch, they have the transcription of the description, and then also several notes: a big traffic cone shaped white bill, solid black head face, light colored eyes, bright red crimson crest, puffed up. So realistically, these are fairly standard. I don't want to spend too much time because we could just sit here reading stories, because there's several more stories, several more pictures. This is literally a cell phone image with a tiny little circle. I'm not going to count that as great evidence. But again, this is one of the lines of evidence. And if you really want to just read some great stories about people who think they've seen the woodpecker, just go ahead and read this. I genuinely enjoy it. I just understand that it's not the best evidence, and it's not the best for this video. So let's jump on. So now let's discuss the audio section of this paper. So audio recordings, again, another standard field ecology technique. In this case, they deployed the audio recording units, ARUs, at 200-meter intervals across a predetermined grid pattern at the core of the research area, and had them run from before sunrise and to sunset. And what they were looking for specifically are Kent calls and double knocks. So specifically, let's see what this looks like. Audio recording, again, is a very standard technique in ecology. I've set up audio recordings for frogs before along wrong Texas roads. And the way they're doing it is through a grid fashion. So all they're really doing is putting a recording here, 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 and so on and so forth, right? So they're making a grid. Each of these is about 200 meters apart. And the benefit of doing this, right? It's not, yes, it's pretty, it's standardized, it looks nice on your figures, but this can be used in the future to triangulate where the birds are. And the hope is that they might be able to find a nesting site, or at least a site of high activity, by using this grid pattern. So say they hear noise right here, right? Sorry, let me give a better example of this. Say that 4 of the audio recordings, let's say these 4, record some call that sounds like an ivory-billed woodpecker. Using these calls and some specialized software, they could see that, okay, on maybe this bottom left corner, it was a lot louder than it was here, and maybe on this bottom right corner, it's also a lot louder. And by using this, they can be using the volume of the call and the general positioning. They could say that, hey, maybe around this area is where a nest could be, just by, triangulation. So that's really what they're saying, is that they might be able to triangulate some type of nest or just areas of high activity using this grid pattern. And the specific calls they are looking for are called the Kent calls and the double knocks. So I have a recording of a known Kent call. So this is an ivory-billed woodpecker. There's 2 recordings that we have of the ivory-billed, and that are known from the 1930s and the 1940s. I believe this is one of them. But I'm a little bit lost as to where this recording is from. It's just not listed on the page in a big way. Anyways, so this is the call. I'm going to mute my mic so that it doesn't play back into my mic. Okay, so you got the gist. It's a higher pitched call, just a little. And that's really all the ivory-billed woodpecker call is. I will say there is a little bit of an asterisk with this. We don't really have that many recordings of the call. We do have written descriptions, but not many audio recordings. And one of the audio recordings, I believe it's the Sanger. Is it the Tanner call? One of the recordings is thought to maybe not be the mating call of the species. It could be a stress call. Just because the person recording it was right below the tree where the woodpeckers were. So just saying that as a potential issue. And double knocks, they actually do have some in the results, so we'll go down to that. There are known double knocks. It's essentially saying that the woodpecker is pecking and the tree, and you'll hear 2 knocks, so right like that. But the double knocks here, they're characteristic of the species, of the genus, and it has been reported for the ivory bills, Tanner 1942. It sounds like the first knock, the second knock is an echo that is, I believe, louder than the first. If you're thinking this is all very minor, nuanced, particular things, that's biology. When I describe frog calls, it's the same type of situation, just very, very nuanced, very specific. And so let's get into the results of the audio recording. So again, they had about 70,000 hours of recordings. This doesn't mean that they recorded straight for 70,000 hours. This means that they had, 100 up to 100 audio recording hours, recording units, recording for maybe 100 hours each, right? Or 70 hours each. 700 hours each. There we go. Math. So 100 units, 700 hours, 70,000 hours, right? And they were unable to produce distributions of the Kent call to narrow the search area. So what that's saying is that, they were unable to actually locate where precisely the calls might be from to locate a nest. But they are looking at the recordings in a future publication. So I do want to kind of keep that as an asterisk. There is more information that could come from this, and I'm just going to wait for this. They did hear some Kent calls, but just not enough. And they did get some double knocks. They were more frequently found than the Kent calls. So if we go into Appendix 2, that is where they actually have some of the recordings of these calls. So again, I'll pause my mute my mic, and we'll play it. So the first one is this is from 2017. And they believe that there are 2 of the calls. So let me just play this. So yeah, the calls are very faint. I will say that these are shown on this spectrogram here. So this is a visual representation of a. Let me hide the appendix really quick. So this is a visual representation of audio. This is when I mentioned I did frog calls. I looked at the spectrograms. I often actually didn't need to listen to it too often unless I just needed to double check what a species was. You can just scan spectrograms to understand what a species is. You just look at a reference. So this is a standard technique, but yeah, this is just showing it that, hey, they have spectrograms, they're looking at it. The next one is a double knock recording. It's a little bit shorter, so again, let me mute myself. So we'll play it one more time. Yeah, you hear that double knock, but the second one sounds a little bit echoey. There is another audio recording with a distant response consistent with the ivory woodpecker. Well, let's do this right here. So the first one is made by humans. Sorry, I should have specified that first knock is by humans. You have to listen very closely to the one at the end with very distant response. Yeah, it's right there at the tail end. If you want to listen to it more carefully, again, go to the paper. It's linked down below. There's another double knock with a barred owl, but I think you get the point. They've heard knocks. There are some issues with the knocks. I will say that there has been some debate on if the knocks can be used as a proper diagnostic. I believe that there are several duck species that can also make that double knock sound when they fly overhead. So it's not perfect. Again, none of this evidence is perfect, but a lot of it is, when combined, can indicate that they might be. So that's really it for the audio. There's a lot of information about what the recordings look like, but I really think that if you want to know more, just read the paper. But let's get into the more imagery stuff. Okay, so let's do trail camera imagery. This is the one that I think a lot of people critique the paper over, and so they had 6 to 34 trail cameras at different times. They resulted in around 472,000 camera hours of activity. Again, if you set out 40 cameras and have them run for 10,000 hours total over the course of years, you would get to that total. So that's really just what it means by when they say 472,000 camera hours. They didn't start one camera and let it run for 400,000 hours. But these are trail cameras, and trail cameras are not always the best for identifying birds. I know on the trail cameras we've set up down in Belize, we do incidentally get birds on them, but they are often not easily identifiable, especially at the distance they have these cameras at. So that is the biggest issue with this. And so what they did was, to understand what the species are, they're looking for diagnostic characters. And specifically, they're looking for characteristics of this species that identify it from other species that are in the same area. So a very common taxa is the pileated woodpecker. Right here, I have a great figure, again, linked down below, that shows the differences between the ivory-billed and the pileated. Of course, the ivory bill has an ivory bill. Museum specimens, sometimes that can darken, so people get a little confused there. But they do look very similar. They're both large-bodied birds. They both have a crest that is red in the males, and in the female ivory-billed, it's actually black. It's seen down here below. And they both have these white stripes going down the necks and to the back. But the big difference that you see with the ivory-billed is these white parts on the bottom portions of their wings. So this is what identifies them from the pileated. So it is white secondary feathers and inner primary feathers. If you know more ornithological forms, they say it looks like a white shield when the wings are folded up. There's several other minor characteristics. One other thing to note is that there are red-headed woodpeckers in this area as well, and they also have these white secondaries and primaries. that look similar, but the red-headed woodpecker is about, I think it's about half the size of the ivory-billed. I will say I'm not an ornithologist, I'm not a birder, so, I'm not going to be trying to identify these pictures. I leave that up to experts and, yeah, people who know more about birds than I. But this is how you identify these birds at a causal glance. And there are a lot of discussion. There is a lot of discussion about the angle of the bird, which we will dive into. So these are the pictures, and I will say very, very upfront, these are not great pictures. And it's not necessarily because they intentionally took bad pictures. It's just that game camera footage kind of sucks at distances, right? So these are obviously blown up. That's why they look so pixelated. And you can see some bird here that does appear, if we really, let me see how far can I zoom in on this? Yeah. So if we really zoom in on this bird right here, you can kind of see a white little bit on the back. That would be that shield that they're looking for. That could be a diagnostic character of it being an ivory-billed woodpecker. That's ultimately what the authors are saying with these particular photos. Again, there could be the red-headed, but it's more and more unlikely based on size and a few other characteristics. So they do show many, many other sightings here. So figure 5, again, here's another one. This one right down here in the bottom. Will it let me zoom in? It will not. Darn it. The one in the bottom right is appearing to have a white shield. Again, it could be a redhead. I'm not seeing a crest on it personally, although the other ones, the other images do show a crest. So just keep that in mind that these are not the best pictures, but these are the ones that they have in their publication. In figure 6, they have a putative ivory-billed woodpecker from the Cuban population that was also photographed. Side-by-side comparison here. So this left-hand portion is the unenhanced image from Cuba in 1956. So this is kind of showing that with a similar type of camera, here's what the ivory-billed would look like, right? So this is the one that is the ivory-billed 1956 with a bad camera, and then here's what theirs look like. So what they're trying to say is that using cameras of similar quality or photos of similar quality, the cameras are higher quality, they're set different distances, the photographs can look very similar, especially on this one. You can kind of see a white shield, and you can kind of see a crest here. So that's what they're saying is that's an ivory-billed woodpecker. Again, the redheads that are here, they don't have that crest and they are a lot smaller. So that's why they're saying that this is a ivory-billed and not a pileated because of the white bands, and not a redheaded because of the crest and general size. So yeah, and this photo is from, the photo on the right-hand side is from 2021. And this is when it gets into some very big nuances that I will list what they say, but I cannot vouch on this, okay? Most intriguing in the birds is the images appear to have a characteristic body posture related from the distinctive morphological adaptations of the feet and legs of these woodpeckers. So, the pileated woodpecker, the one that looks very similar to the ivory-billed, so this one here on the right-hand side, they are largely unspecialized woodpeckers, and their legs are positioned more or less beneath the pelvic girdle. The joints are flexed, and the tarsi are held well away from the tree trunk. By contrast, the ivory-billed woodpeckers, or at least their genus, their feet are pamprodactyl. It's a pedal morphology which enables the facultative forward motion of all 4 toes. I pre-prepared this, so birders love feet. It's just a known fact, and it's because birds have crazy feet. So, in here, what they're saying is that the ivory-bills have this condition down here, this E. It's called pamprodactyl. And really what it's saying is that they can move their back toe, they have 4 toes, 3 in the front, 1 in the back, that they can move the 4th one up and over around. That's what they're saying, is that sometimes it's below, and then they move it up and around to grip on to something. Other species of birds are, a lot of woodpeckers are zygodactyl, which is this B one right up here, like right by my head. And that is one where it's 2 in the front, 2 in the back. And if you think about it, when woodpeckers get onto a tree, they're on the side of the tree. So they want kind of like a grip like this. So it's like a counter force. that they can actually grip onto the tree trunk with, and then thus they can climb up it. In this case, they're saying that the pamperdactyl is sort of hooking into the tree like this. And because of the differences in the toes, okay, I know this sounds super conspiratorial, but it's biology. Because of the position of the toes and thus how the weight is distributed onto those toes, whether that's two toes at the bottom pushing in, or one being moved up front, or just one in the back, that is going to influence how far away the bird is from the trunk, as well as its relative angle to that trunk. And they do go extremely in depth on this. I will say that I am not the best at being able to tell what that all would look like. But the author spent a long time talking about how the feet and legs are held outward from the body, directed diagonally upward and sideways, both feet wide apart. This is actually one of the largest parts of the description. If we go into the appendix, there are plenty more photos. Some of these are photos that they actually put together as videos to show it. I will encourage you to go look at Appendix 3. I just already know from trialing this out that it's impossible for me to make this look at all convincing on this screen. So this is just a time lapse of many photos stitched together, and there are little birds flying in and out of frame. Again, it's like from a low angle, it's somewhat backlit, but you can see it and make it out. What they're using for this particular image is what they're trying to do is that they're showing 3 large woodpeckers foraging together, and unlike the pileatids, they where is this? They aren't as strongly territorial, and offspring can remain with family groups. So what they're trying to do is trying to use the life history of the species to indicate. They're saying that if this were a pileated, the pileated would have likely ran off the other birds, but the 3 of them being together makes them more familial. And this is also kind of a known thing. I know when we go down into Belize and we take people birding or whatever, we have toucans as well as arasaris, which are like goth toucans. And we tell people that if you can't tell from a distance, like you're struggling to see what it is, if it's 1 or 2, it's more likely to be the toucan. But if you see a large family group, it's more likely to be an arasari. So I'm saying that saying that as a claim is not unrealistic. I truthfully don't know how territorial pileators are, and I don't really know that. So I'm just saying that in other birds, this is a normal thing that also can be said. But yeah, so the pictures are, of course, grainy. They are, of course, very tricky to look at. I will say that there's some really cool stuff here. I am trying to see. I know I have a note, and the note might actually be in the... yes. So this I thought was super cool. So, to figure out the size of these birds, they would look for other ones that they've identified as a pileated or a redhead. So, comparative photos of other birds in the same tree, taken by the same camera, include an unidentified small woodpecker, a pileated woodpecker, and a red-headed woodpecker. And this confirms the large size of these ivory-billed pictures. So, again, they're using the actual physical anatomy of the birds. They're using those field marks. They are using the relative size of the birds. And also behavioral ecology to say that this is why we think it's an ivory-billed woodpecker. So even though the camera images are blurry and they're not perfect, they're using multiple lines of evidence from those pictures. And I kind of wanted to show this. I just thought this was kind of cool. Oh, actually, so this is for the video. So let's hop into the video, and then I'll show you something cool. So they also took drone videos. The drone videos, they sent a drone high up above the canopy to a level that is thought to not influence bird behavior, or other species behavior for that matter. And they made about 3,000 flights over a 3-year period, 2.5-year period, recorded about 1,000 hours of video footage. By having the drone hover, they can have a video feed looking down at the canopy, and it's actually a pretty stable video, which is really, really cool. So I will be very honest that on this in this format on YouTube, where we're looking at a video of a video, it is very, very tricky to see what I see. So I would highly recommend looking this up yourself too and going to the links down below. So this is a video. It's in the appendix. Again, you can access the appendix, no problem. With a woodpecker, a putative woodpecker. It's actually right here on this little branch right now, and you'll see it fly away in just a second. Come on, little birdie, fly away, fly away. Let me prove the internet YouTubers wrong or right. There we go, flying away. So again, these are not perfect by any means. So they did use some really cool calculations though for this, and they were able to make some markings, but the calculations they used are here in Appendix 8, and I just thought this was kind of neat. When they said that they looked at the comparative size of the birds and said, oh, this is an ivory-billed, not a redhead because it's larger. This is how they did it. It's at first it does sound super sketch. It's like using a millimeter ruler on a computer monitor. We made 3 measurements. So they're not saying that, you know, they put the ruler up on the monitor and say, the ruler says it's 3 millimeters, so it must be 30 centimeters. Like, that's not necessarily what they're doing. They included measurements, but what they did was they knew what the diameter of the tree was. So the diameter at breast height, dBH. They actually had measurements of that tree at different heights. I believe at different heights. Well, they took different measurements, so and averaged them. So by virtue of that, different heights. And they knew the zoom factor of the computer monitor in that particular instance, so they actually knew how the computer monitor can distort things, how it can zoom in, and they were able to get a ratio of the wingspan of the bird to that diameter at breast height. And from that, they were able to determine an example of what that wingspan would be. And this is the part that I just thought was super, super cool. The bird was slightly closer to the drone than the point on the trunk where the dBH was measured. To take into account this difference, we compared the distances from the drone to the bird and the drone to the dBH point. To calculate the distance from the drone to the bird, they used Pythagorean theorem. So if you are, c squared equals a squared plus b squared. If you are an elementary school teacher, or actually college level, I think they still teach Pythagorean theorem. High school, definitely. If you're a teacher, and you need a real-world example of when will I ever use Pythagorean theorem in real life, well, it's to find an endangered species of bird. And I just thought that was super cool. And all the math is listed out here. They also talk about their different assumptions. So, yeah. Cool, right? I just thought that was super cool. So the drone footage, of course, they do list out that they see on the birds extensive white on the dorsal surface, again, ivory-billed woodpecker, clear black body dividing the wings. They see that extensive white saddle. But again, it's very tricky to show you these video footages. I mean, I'll show it. But from my angle, it is also very tricky to see when I don't have that necessary experience. So I know for you, it's also even harder to see it. But they were able to tell the relative size of the birds by using really cool math. And this is something that is also well known. I've had to take measurements from cameras, albeit in a little bit of a different way, where we took a picture next to something like tadpoles in this case with a ruler in frame, and from there you could calibrate the software to get measurements of the species. So taking measurements from digital media is not unique, is kind of what I'm saying. And they also list it very, very blatantly. Sorry, the crows outside are going nuts. But yeah, so the video footage is some of the better footage. I will say that if you saw my Instagram post, I listed this as a correction. There was a mistake in the publication where they switched to the captions. Unfortunately, to the 2 captions they switched were one of a putative ivory-billed woodpecker, another one of a known pileated woodpecker, which just added so much confusion. But they were doing that to show, like, here's what it looks like. We can get video. Here's how we can compare it. So just being very, very blatant about their video footage. And the figures do have images that are extracted from the video clips. Some of them are a little bit more clear than the others. But yeah, that is basically all of their methods. So let's hop into the discussion. So that was their methods and results. At as any discussion, they do just kind of rehash the results, but also talk about any biases, any potential problems. And I think a lot of people were not reading the discussion and just jumping to claims. So audio recordings appear generally consistent with those of ivory-billed woodpeckers, but they do note that the recordings they are using to reference these calls might have subtle acoustic distortions due to the microphone that was used. It was a parabolic microphone. The birds were possibly agitated because the person taking recordings of the call were standing at the base of the nesting tree, so they might be making calls to say, hey, get away from my babies. And the when the bird is disturbed, the pitch of the kent can go higher. So if you're using that information, that audio call, to train a model to detect audio calls in all of your audio recordings, it might be using improper data, right? It might be using stuff that's a little bit pitched too high. For trail cameras, they are very honest that the trail cameras are designed for close range photography, and the ones being used here are really tricky, and it's hard to get anything from these trail cameras. And just think about the person who had to go through and sift through all of those field camera footages and look amongst all the trees for the birds. So massive kudos to the people working on this project. Regardless of what you believe, if it's still there or not, the amount of work they have done is absolutely insane. They do say that the white saddle, consistent with ivory-billed woodpeckers, is seen in some frames. Sometimes it's not seen in frames. But lighting conditions can play into this role, into showing white marks. But honestly, from a lot of the pictures, seeing that there's multiple pictures where the white saddle is in frame, it's not as good of an argument as if it was just a single photo, right? And this is where I kind of want to talk about some of the common arguments that I'm seeing, particularly on Facebook. I'm sorry, Facebook comment sections are the craziest amount of trash talking I have ever seen. So large crested woodpeckers with extensive white plumage, consistent with characters of ivory-billed woodpeckers, are sometimes dismissed as aberrations or leucistic pileated woodpeckers. So this is saying that, hey, maybe you're not seeing this bird that might have been extinct for the last 60 years. You might be seeing a known species that looks similar, but is an aberrant, that just looks a little bit different, that has some pattern that is not typical of the species. But I do want to show you what a leucistic pileated looks like. They're all white. I mean, it's not it's not very easy to mix this up with a different species, right? So I don't think saying it's a leucistic is a very good character, because they look wildly different. And aberrations, of course, could be a thing. And there's the argument to be made then that maybe ivory-billed never existed. It was always an aberration of a pileated. I don't really think that's a good argument at all. And also, people say that what if it is an aberrant, but then no bird has ever been recorded. No aberrant pileated has ever been recorded. So it's like, you're saying this thing that has never been recorded, but then here we have recordings. It's like fighting a weak argument with a weaker argument, is kind of what they're saying. If there are foreign artifacts in the video, they're saying that it can happen. Camera quality is not necessarily a big issue anymore. It's, of course, we're zooming in, so you could talk about the resolution of the camera not being adequate, and that's totally fine. But again, this is just talking about, hey, the videos might have issues, they may not, but probably not in these cases. But one big part that I can tell the authors were expecting the negative comments, because a very counterclaim, which we even mentioned up in the intro, is that experience with other rare birds suggests that any valid sighting should very quickly lead to more sightings. Okay. And this is a thing. It's like, well, hey, cool, we're seeing an image of a pileated, but in order to confirm it, why are we not seeing more? Like, if you see one, you should be able to see it 7 or 8 times. And there's kind of a twofold issue with this argument, right? There's kind of multiple issues here. It's that's a really bad assumption. If a species is rare, you're not going to see it more often because you saw it once. That's actually an improper probability, improper statistics. That's saying that, you flip a coin heads, then you're more likely to get tails next time. That's not what's happening. Or if you have a 1% chance of seeing a bird, then the next time you still have that 1% chance. You don't have now a 50% chance of seeing it. It's, so it's not proper framing of the argument. And they say that people use this argument, and so frustratingly, this criticism was lodged despite the fact that the Lanao video followed a series of sightings and itself followed by additional sightings and acoustic recordings. Um, all of the observations here reported took place in a single forested block in a single watershed. All of the counters reported here within a 1.6 kilometer of one another. And it's the majority of the trail camera photos were taken over 2-3 month periods on the same tree. So they're saying that even if this fallacy of if you see it once you'll see it again were true, we are seeing it. They are seeing it again. They are seeing it multiple times, and different people are seeing it multiple times. So I think that there's like just it's a poor argument, and just also from experience, especially when it's talking about, well, why aren't there more pictures? I can tell you the exact log an arboreal salamander lives in near me. I know the exact log. I have visited it multiple times. I see him there. I have seen him at least 4 times, and I have never been able to get a picture. Never, because he just goes into the log and he's gone. And that's pretty common. If you're out looking for species, you know how some people spend years looking for a taxa that maybe other people have found or that no one else has found. But you'll spend years, and you may have even seen it, but because you don't have a picture, or you have really great indirect evidence, but you don't have a picture, and people discount it. So I'm just saying that some of the arguments are kind of not well articulated. They're not well thought out. And something that the authors have said repeatedly is that if it does exist, it is rare. It is exceedingly rare. This is maybe 1 or 2 populations left in the world, okay? So, yeah, how hard is it to see an animal there's only 10 of? I mean, come on. It's hard. It's very, very difficult. And it's this misperception. There is a misperception that this particular species is very easy to find. And the authors do talk about why they think that is. So the Tanner recordings, that's one of the audio recordings, that's the one where he was at the base of the tree recording them. He described them as loud birds, but in reality he was disturbing their nest, or potentially disturbing their nest. Even the quietest bird species is likely to get kind of loud if you're disturbing their nest and threatening their young. So maybe the species isn't as loud as we thought it was. And the people who were looking for it back in the 30s and 40s, they said the difficulty of finding the birds, even when their whereabouts are known, limited the number of observations. So even when they knew where the bird was, they struggled to get observations. And so there's another argument that, well, just by law of big numbers, such a large distinction of woodpeckers, how could it escape the sights of cameras, recorders, binoculars, because there's plenty of hunters in the area. The authors reference sometimes you hear like deer hunting in the audio recordings, and it's in remote areas. I really hate that argument. This is like saying that, oh well, we should see snow leopard pictures all the time if people start hiking through there, and that's not necessarily true. Especially again, it's a rare species. And they actually compared this to eBird sightings, which eBird is a great app for people recording what birds they've seen. And they said, even in North America, which has the most thorough coverage of eBird sightings, modeling of the range and abundance of individual species at a 3-kilometer spatial resolution results in areas of no predictions. What that's saying is that if you try to, look at a particular species at a very small resolution, you won't get any predictions there because there's not enough data to inform that model, and their site is small as well. And there is literally no eBird checklist in their area, in their study site. So it's this law of like, well, how come some eBirder hasn't driven by and put it on their list? It's like, well, because it's a highly secluded area that is probably off limits too. I don't know what this site is, but like it's hard to get to. This isn't your city park, and that's what they're saying here. So ultimately, let's just leave it at this. I just see a lot of internet comments that are they're not giving fair critiques, and there's plenty that do give awesome critiques, and they're really, really good. Ultimately, where I'm at is I am like 50-50 on this. I choose to believe the authors. That's ultimately what I believe. It's Like, it's easy for me to discount it living, yeah, what, 4 states away now, looking at it through my computer screen. But then it's like, there's these biologists there who have been working on this for 10 years, who they themselves have a decade of experience, right? So it's like, it's so dismissive to say that based on me being internet armchair expert, viewing the footage that you have put forthright, I believe you are improperly identifying this species, even though you say that it's this and that because of this. I think otherwise. It's just like a really bad argument, and a lot of the times you see that people don't read the papers, and it is very, very annoying to see that. Um, I don't know if the authors are perfectly correct here. I don't want to say. I choose to believe that. I guess like hopeful skepticism, right? That's ultimately where I'm at. But if the authors say it's there, I choose to trust them on that, because that's how biology kind of works. You know, the person who has spent the time in the field, the person who has lived there, who has like worked on it. And it's not just one person. This is many people over many, many different programs, looking at it in many different ways. Like, this is a lot of information. And yeah, so it's ultimately the biologists are doing the hard work, and I choose to trust them on this. I understand this is a very long video, so if you're watching to the end, you're awesome. You're a vamp. But yeah, in the interest of time, I have lots of thoughts on this, but I think I'm going to leave it here. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But yeah, I hope this was insightful for you. Have a great day. Hope you see an Ivory-Billed Woodpecker.